national security perspective, the tech perspective, geopolitics, you name it. And so we're going to cover it all here. And of course, also welcoming questions from the audience as well. We're looking forward to those. I have a great panel here that really needs no introduction. To my left, Isobel Coleman, the U.S. Deputy Administrator, the USAID Deputy Administrator, always great to see her. Jeffrey McGregor, who is the CEO of Truepic, and Ziad Asghar, who is the Senior Vice President of Product Management of Qualcomm. Unfortunately, Secretary of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff is stuck with the aviation gods and had a delayed flight and could not make it on time, so we're going to miss him today. But definitely, we value his perspectives, and hopefully you'll be able to hear from him on this subject another time. So, Deputy Administrator, I'm going to start with you. We hear a lot about the threats of AI-generated technology. We talk about it not just in the context of the U.S., but globally as well. Can you shed some light on really what we're talking about now? We're excited about this technology, but there's also a wariness, a hesitation there. So explain that dynamic, or that make sense of that for us.
Certainly. Thank you, Vivian. It's great to be here, and thank you to Truepic for hosting this, and also a shout out to Vera Zachem, who's our Chief Digital Democracy Rights Officer. So thank you. Look, I think everybody in this room shares an excitement about AI. The potential is endless, it's boundless. We haven't even begun to scratch the surface on how to use it in really exciting, transformative ways, but we're also very, very cognizant of the risks. You mentioned this being an election year. I think that really ups the ante on the risks, because we're seeing AI used in nefarious ways, frankly, by authoritarian governments around the world. We're seeing manipulation of information. We're seeing authoritarian governments using AI to do what they've always been doing, but just to amp it up, ramp it up, and do it in a way that is much harder to detect. It provides them with more plausible deniability, and it leads people to be very confused over what's actually true or not true. We're seeing deep fakes, we're now seeing cheap fakes, that are spreading, that are so easy to do in the hands of people, and it's really creating tremendous risk, particularly in the political space. This being the year of elections, 64 countries plus the EU are having elections this year. All I can say is buckle up, because there's enormous opportunity for mis and disinformation that AI can really accelerate. We at USAID, we've been very focused on creating a vision for the use of AI that's responsible and rights respecting, and working with partner governments to try to institute that around the world, working with multilateral organizations, working with the private sector too, but the risks are there, and there are enormous vulnerabilities, and we should all be very cognizant.
You mentioned the nefarious ways in which some governments and some leaders use this technology. Just for those who don't live and breathe geopolitics as you and I might, give examples of that.
Oh, I will absolutely give you an example. I just came back from Moldova. And Moldova's, look, a tiny little country, but very strategic. It's nestled between Romania and Ukraine, and it actually hosts Russian soldiers inside of Moldova that Russia's determined not to let Moldova go the way that other countries have been trending, which is in a more westward direction. They would like to join the EU. They've started a process to join the EU. President Sandu, who is a very inspirational leader in Moldova, she's up for re-election this year. And they also have on the ballot a referendum to insert language in their constitution affirming the country's desire to join the EU. So October 20th is a very big election in Moldova. In December, all over the country spread a video of the president urging people to no longer go out and pick rose hips, which are a little flower they use to boil tea. And it's a traditional tea that people drink around the holidays. on the grounds of being environmentally sensitive, no longer do this. And this is an example of this president, undercutting tradition and values, and this is what's going to happen if you join the EU. The problem is that it was a fake. The whole thing was fake. And in fact, Politico has an article today reporting on it. I recommend all of you read it. But as I said, I was just in Moldova. I just got back, and it's everywhere. And they're so conscious of the tsunami of disinformation that is going to overwhelm this country in the lead up to this election as they try to get out from under the thumb of Russia and join the West. And so, this is a salvo in this information war.
Fascinating. I definitely want to pull on this a little more, but I want to give our audience a chance to get to know all of our panelists a little bit. Jeff, again, here we talk about, we celebrate the technology, and we also talk about these risks. You look at solutions, you and Ziad, and your companies look at solutions, and so can you talk a little bit about where we are at this stage?
I would love to, and Vivian, thank you for hosting today. I appreciate it for moderating this, and Ziad, thanks for joining. Deputy Administrator Coleman, thank you for joining, and thank you for your leadership in Ukraine as well. We really appreciate it, and the work we've done together documenting some of the destruction there has been really critical, and it's been fantastic to work together. So in terms of where we're at right now, we talk a lot at Truepic about entering a zero trust environment with digital media. And we've had the benefit of working with hundreds of customers over the course of the past 8 years. And there's one common thread that exists between all those customers, which is a lack of trust in what they are looking at every day. And it doesn't matter whether it's an insurance carrier or whether we're talking about news media, social media, any industry that is operating off of digital media, people are making critical decisions when they see images and videos. And the restoration of trust in that content is paramount. So today, there are a number of technologies that do exist and are being actively implemented that can restore trust in visual media across the internet. That's the good news. In particular, there's a standard called the C2PA, which is the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And what that standard does is it simply exposes the origin and history of digital content over time. And it gives consumers the ability to view that when they're looking at a photo or video and understand and make their own decision around the credibility of that content. Truepic enables that standard for third parties. We have a certain set of technologies and tools that make it very easy for partners to implement that. But the standard has a lot of promise in that content creators, OpenAI, for example, announced today that they've rolled the standard out across DALL-E and Sora. So every single image produced by OpenAI now carries this authenticity marker with it, which is a huge step forward. Meta publicly announced in February that they will be ingesting C2PA data and displaying that back to consumers, which again is a big step forward. Folks like Ziad and the wonderful team at Qualcomm are implementing C2PA on Snapdragon, which brings massive distribution to where content is created. And all of this creates a cumulative effect, wherein content transparency, both where media is created and where media is displayed, is starting to get tremendous momentum and will start to reach consumers very quickly. And as Deputy Administrator Coleman mentioned, we're in a pressure cooker year right now in terms of elections happening around the world. It's created the right incentive structure for companies to start implementing C2PA, and we are seeing that acceleration, so we see a lot of promise there.
And Ziad, can you please chime in? We're talking about solutions still. How can you develop solutions at scale given the challenges that you all
Well, thank you for having me, and the engagement with Truepic has been really great for us, but it exactly allows us to do what you're saying. Because see, all the content, if you look at where the content is being created today, it's pretty much on the device. 85% of the pictures that people take are taken on smartphones. DSLRs, I remember I used to travel and carry my DSLR. Nobody does that anymore. So really the devices that people are creating this content on, whether it's text or video or images or audio, It's really on a smartphone, it's on a PC, on devices that we call like the devices at the edge. So the question that we all have to think through is, like Deputy mentioned, right? I mean, you want to be able to use the great power of generative AI, but you want to be able to do it in a way that basically distinguishes what is synthesized and distinguish what is real. So what we have been working with, Truepic team is really a way to be able to say, this content is authentic. This is what we captured as coming directly from the image sensor of the camera. And that's how we're able to ensure that it has not been tampered with, it has not been modified, and that's going to be the way for us to be able to make sure that as people are absorbing their news, people don't watch news at 5 p.m. or whatever today, right? The young actually absorb news in a very different way. They take it from social media, they take it from other places, and it's important that we preserve the mechanism by which they are getting the news. That's absolutely one of them, which is images, and the way people basically get the information is through images and JPEGs that float around on Facebook and other platforms. So if we are actually able to say, this image was created as is, this is an image that somebody has, for entertainment purposes, for productivity purposes, or what have you, he has modified this image. Just that distinction itself is a great first step towards leveraging C2PA and other technologies to be able to distinguish what is real and what is synthesized. And then I also want to say that we have to look at solutions that are at every level. At the level of the technology, which is the AI model in itself, can there be inherent checks and balances in there? At the industry level, are there industry consortia, like C2PA is one example, and then are there government level initiatives as well to be able to preserve the synthesized data versus original data? I think that's very critical.
I mean, everything you're saying, you talk about checks and balances and the solutions that the tech industry is trying to develop here, but literally everyone has a computer in their pockets at this point. I have two just right in front of me. I mean, the technology is evolving so rapidly, and then you have questions about how then to impose regulations and governance, which is something that the government and the private sector are trying to collaborate on, but it's still a challenge. And so, Deputy Administrator, I know that President Biden signed an executive order providing some rules around generative AI ahead of legislation that came that lawmakers were in front of lawmakers last week, and among them 8 goals. To create new standards for AI safety and security, protect privacy, promote innovation and competition, and advance U.S. leadership. So how does that work exactly, and particularly, again, in this environment where global regulation and governments are still fluid at best?
Well, the executive order, I think, was very, very timely and important. It's both how government agencies are going to manage themselves, how we are managing AI internally. We're already seeing some tremendous opportunities to deploy AI for our own work, to cut through a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, to be able to produce documents. I mean, the number of people we have writing similar documents again and again, a lot of this can be streamlined by using AI and freeing up people's time and bandwidth to do much more value-added tasks. So internally, we have a lot of opportunity. Externally, we haven't, as I said in the beginning, we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of the ways in which we can use AI for good. And so part of the executive order is for every government agency to appoint a chief AI officer who will really be thinking about how do we at USAID deploy AI for good in the world. Everything from delivering healthcare more efficiently and effectively and innovatively to education, all sorts of things. But we also are working with partner governments around the world to help them understand the need for regulation, the need for managing risk as they roll out a new technologies, digital technologies, and generative AI in their ecosystems. And it's complicated, but we are working closely with partner governments to help them understand what best-in-class legislation looks like and how to deploy that and how to put guardrails in place to manage some of the risks that we've been talking about.
Are these guardrails enough, gentlemen? I mean, again, we're talking about such a vast universe online. The technology is evolving so quickly. Are these government regulations enough to really regulate and be able to, A, allow you to do what you do within the confines of sort of a threat, avoiding the threat risks that the technology poses?
It's a great question. I will say that last year the Biden administration had passed the initial executive order that had, I believe, 15 companies initially proactively opt in to what that executive order had laid out. And that had a tremendous impact around adoption of content authenticity technologies. We found that many times some of the larger technology companies lack commercial incentive to prioritize certain items, content authenticity being one of those. And in the wake of the executive order and with the opt-in nature of it, we saw that there was significant investment made in adopting real tangible solutions as a result of that. And then we soon after saw the AI Tech Accord, which had 20 companies that had signed on to it, that was led, I believe, initially by Microsoft. And similarly, we saw, just as a company that helps others adopt this technology, we saw an influx of interest in how do we get started quickly, how do we make sure we have the right safeguards in place, and can you help us? And that's been, I think, really positive to see, because outside of that, there had been a lack of pure commercial incentive to prioritize that work.
I mean, Ziad, please chime in. I'm as a journalist, I'm naturally very skeptical on these things, and so I'm curious. I mean, does it work in the end, these regulations?
Yeah, I think, again, I think the industry and the government need to find a very kind of a balance here, right? If you over-regulate, of course, there is a limitation to the innovation that you can do also, right? So I think the government will find a nice balance in between where people are able to innovate, bring in the capabilities, bring in the advantages to the consumers, while at the same time making technology safe. And that's why I think what I said earlier was it has to be at all those different levels. So if you're looking at the new models are coming in, for example, they have guardrails within them in many cases to be able to prevent certain kinds of questions that could be injurious to young children or others are automatically taken care of with guardrails that are built into the model. So if you look at the new models that we're engaged with Meta on Llama 3, you can see some of the steps that they have taken over there. So that's at a model level. Then additionally, people are adding in frameworks on top of their AI software. This, you can think of this as orchestration. And what you can do is, for example, you can augment the result from a large language model by using things called RAGs, or retrieval augmented generation. That can also help steer the discussion in a way that's much safer for, again, the audience that is trying to consume that data. So that's kind of like the second level within the technology framework. Above that, there are of course industry level consortia. So we're working with ML Commons. That's another organization with multiple companies all working on AI, where what we're looking at is how to be able to define a test or a benchmark for safe AI, for example. So that effort is going on. So that's like an industry level example. And then of course, similarly, the engagement in the work that we have at Truepic is another very good example of how you can do that for content. But AI is content, but AI is also large language models and multimodality sort of models. I mean, we can run 7 billion, 10 billion parameter models on a smartphone today. What we recently showed at our Mobile World Congress engagement was a multi-model model that basically essentially is able to tell you what an image has in it. So just imagine the benefit and utility it can bring, right? So let's say it's a visually impaired person, and they're wearing an AR sort of glass. There is a camera up top. And based on that camera, the model tells you, well, there are 3 cars in front of you. The signal is red, so you shouldn't cross right now, right? It just tells you the power of these things. But it's important that we provide a balance between that innovation aspect and then the regulatory part of it. But we think that these different levels of it, at the technology level, at the industry level, at the government level, you need all 3 to be able to make this happen.
That literally sets me up for the next question for you about that balance. How do you strike it from the government perspective? How do you strike the balance between access to the technology and mitigating the natural risks that it poses?
Well, I do think it is a balance, as we all know, and I would just add there's another piece to it. Mm-hmm. It's not just the government and the private sector and the technology, but it's also the person, the people. At the end of the day, it is humans who are using this, and we spend a lot of time at USAID really investing in helping young people understand what they're seeing, how to evaluate information, how to look at a photograph, whether it's been authenticated or not, to wonder, is this real? The information that they're reading, to be able to question and have the tools that they need to operate and discern, what is true and what is not. We are working in countries around the world doing instructional videos, for example, that are shown in high schools throughout the Philippines as one example, to help them understand how the information space is changing, how they need to be not just taking everything at face value, but thinking about it and questioning. So that's, I think, a long way of saying, I'm not sure we're ever going to get the balance totally right for a perfect solution. I think regulation is necessary but not sufficient by any means. People are going to have to learn how to operate in a very fluid, dynamic environment, and to be able to evaluate for themselves. And the more they have the tools and the capacity, the analytical tools to do that, the better off they'll be.
This was really a question that I had intended to ask Secretary Chertoff, from the Homeland security perspective. But again, we were talking about elections earlier. Do you feel that the U.S., you're talking about the global assessment, but here in the U.S., are we ready for what's coming? I mean, the first election I covered while being based in D.C. was 2016, and election interference was a huge topic of conversation after the fact, because there was a sense that we were sort of blindsided by a lot of the technology. And now it is so much more sophisticated. And I just wonder, where we stand in the U.S. as far as, awareness is there that this is a threat, but are we prepared to confront it?
I'm going to have to punt on that question, because I really don't work domestically in the U.S., but what I can tell you is, looking overseas, in countries like Moldova, a country of 2.5 million people. Okay, the stakes are big for Moldova, but are they as big as the stakes in our country? I'm not so sure. You could argue that the stakes are bigger here. Right. The level of sophistication in what's going on in Moldova, again, I say buckle up, because if it's happening in Moldova, it's happening all around the world. Sure. in critical elections.
Sure. I just interviewed the Montenegrin Prime Minister, and it was the same story, where Russian use of technology of all kinds in their election, and it was something that was very disruptive for them and something they're very aware of. So Jeff and Ziad, while preparing for this, I read an article that was entitled, "AI Deepfakes Are Cheap, Easy, and Coming to the 2024 Elections," which I guess says it all, right? I mean, the industry talks about this concept of digital content provenance, but how does that help address these threats?
First of all, there are too many acronyms with digital content provenance and authenticity and CGPA
Go
and
easy
all
on
these
us.
things. It's very challenging. Which brings me to one follow-up point: is there is a major consumer media literacy and education challenge as it stands today, and I think the folks in this room are generally aware to be pretty skeptical around what they're viewing and to look deeper and look for other signals. I would say, generally speaking, from a global standpoint, we're not prepared from a media literacy standpoint to truly, look for authenticity markers, understand how to interpret some of that, which is certainly challenging. And I think let me just talk very broadly about media provenance and content authenticity.
Please.
There are two approaches here. One is a detection-based approach. So we're talking about AI-generated threats, deepfakes, synthetic media. One approach is to go back in time, look at a piece of media, analyze it using some sort of ML, and make a probabilistic determination of whether that media is synthetic. The unfortunate part of that approach is that it'll always be probabilistic. There will always be some portion of false positives and false negatives associated with it. And when you talk about the scale, the pure scale of digital media, both synthetic and authentic, even a couple percentage points in terms of the model not being correct results in a massive amount of digital media that remains undetected if it is falsified. It's also very much a cat and mouse game in terms of the ability for detection-based algorithms to keep up with the sheer investment into AI-generated content, and you can just look at the investment into OpenAI and other companies, that level of capital is not going into detection-based approaches, so it's going to be very challenging for them to keep up. So what the industry has aligned on, and kudos to Ziad and Qualcomm for being early to the party, has been around content provenance, because it is a proven technological approach, similar to SSL certificates in your browser, where you see a lock when you're visiting a secured website that you can trust. It uses the same certificate-based approach to bind trusted data to a file. And the robustness, the scale, the security of that all far outweighs what we believe is possible with detection. The downside is, of course, that it does need to be adopted by an ecosystem. So where content is created, that includes smartphones, that includes the AI models, as well as publishers. That includes social media, news media, anywhere where you're consuming content needs to adopt the specification. So where are we at today? We have an ecosystem coming together around content provenance, and we have a couple of years of work to get to a place where everyone has adopted, and we have that end-to-end, glass-to-glass authenticity that I think we desperately need to uphold the sanctity of digital media. And in the interim, detection can play a role in helping to provide a signal for when media is potentially synthetic, and that can also be flagged and displayed to consumers, to governments, to commercial entities. But it is going to take both of those efforts in the interim, and we believe content provenance and media provenance will be the long-term solution.
I think I can add to that, right? So the work that we've done working with Truepic is a way to, of course, it's a step in the right direction, but I think like Jeff said, right, it has to be about the ecosystem adopting it, to a great extent, and that's where you start to see the benefit. And I mean, the earlier point also, right, people do value that what they're looking at, if it is real or if it is modified. There's a value that people assign to that, right? So the example that I gave earlier, if you take a picture on your smartphone, the earlier in that generation phase that you can assign that security credentials to it, right? What we call basically to sign an image, essentially, right after it comes out from that sensor, means that now we know where the image came from. And then what we do within our devices, like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for the smartphone market, is we actually track it from there on. And if any other application within the high-level OS is able to change it or modify it, we are actually able to keep track of it. And that's how you're able to preserve the authenticity of that content as it goes through the device. And actually you can pass on the content credentials as the image passes on from one device to another as well. And I think all those steps are what we'd have to do to basically get it right. And the good part of it is now, even if we can do it to the level that, hey, this image has the stamp, this is untampered. Everything else you assume is tampered, right? Even that level of understanding automatically makes people think, oh yeah, I saw that image about that politician doing that activity, but I did not see the stamp on it. I think we have to train the human, I think that was mentioned earlier by Jeffrey, right? I mean, that is the way that we need to train people such that we can then assure that they understand what is created and what is original content. And that's going to be great for us.
Absolutely, yes, please.
Can I just add, as you're doing all of this incredibly important work, people are getting more and more of their information off of Telegram, things that are not going to be as accessible to these types of interventions. And so one of the things we're doing, just like we're trying to provide people, young people, with the skills they need, we're also trying to help independent media survive so that they can be using authenticated images and putting out real news. It's really tough. We look at independent media in this country, but in many of the countries, partner countries where we work, they face an extraordinarily big challenge financially to survive. And so we have created a range of different programs to really bolster independent media. Everything from working with Microsoft to provide analytical tools to independent media so they can analyze what they're doing and how their information that they're putting out is being read and what appeals to people, so that they can have a model that actually works in their own country. Plus, just providing technical support and other capacity building to independent media, because it is an ecosystem. You have to have media out there that wants to put out truth and real information that is authenticated versus places that don't.
Well, and the flip side is true too, right? How do you then regulate it in a way that the public has trust in the real media, that they don't think that we are disseminating fake news as well? And this is a challenge that we all face at the moment. So
I think that's right. There's a concept called the liar's dividend, which if we lose trust in enough of what we're consuming, we're going to lose trust in everything, because everything can essentially be discredited, right? So even authentic media, it's very easy for someone to say, oh, that was a deep fake, that was synthetic, right? And we see more and more news stories, both on a local basis and on a national level, that the liar's dividend is appearing, which I think hammers home the importance of being able to create true, verifiable, authentic information that has a root of trust, like the hardware level verification of a smartphone. Because I think people really are trending in the direction of just becoming more distrustful of what they're consuming.
Right.
So it does feel like a race to be able to provide that quickly enough to people in a way that really matters.
sure, I'm old enough to remember when there was a president of the United States accusing us of being fake news. So I moderate a lot of these events, and I honestly have not seen so many questions pour in. There's a lot of enthusiasm, so I do want to give time to some of the questions from the audience. One of them says, much of the more sinister AI-generated content seems to come from open source models. Does content provenance work for those? I don't know if you gentlemen want to take that.
I will say that content provenance needs to be implemented at the point of creation of media. The expectation with content provenance is you are enabling good actors to add transparency to content. Now, a bad actor using an open source model to create a malicious piece of synthetic media that is not going to carry C2PA or content transparency, which brings up an important point that Ziad made, which is the expectation has to become for consumers to look for that credential mark and to place more trust in content that carries it, and if content doesn't carry it, to call it into more question.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And how long until that's widespread? Did you say a couple of years?
It's a hard question. It's the right question. So consumers will start seeing credentials this year, undoubtedly. And as I mentioned, OpenAI, Meta, Microsoft have made, Qualcomm have made very public announcements around adopting C2PA. So they will start seeing it this year. Seeing it at scale requires broad smartphone adoption in a way that is very material to people having access to these technologies. That's going to take at least a year, probably more like 2 years.
I would add a little bit just about open source. I think open source also brings a lot of advantages. I think the advantages that come with it is, for example, one of the very good models recently that has been open source is the Meta Llama 3 model. Its quality is very good. If you look at the accuracy of the results, it's very, very good. Like I said, it's developed by, of course, a company that has built-in guardrails and safety features and all. So it actually makes it pretty good. And then what it does, it allows a lot of people to work on that model. So Meta actually, of course, gets a lot of benefit from that too, because a lot of the research community that's working on new AI models, they're taking that as their starting point, and then they're fine-tuning the model and improving. So there's a lot of benefits that accrue, when you start from an open source sort of a model from a technology perspective. But so, you can do nefarious things with closed models too, and you can do nefarious things with open models too. But open models allow quite a lot of innovation. I just wanted to mention that there are quite a lot of advantages to the industry when these open models come out, especially the very performant ones.
Great. We have another question here specifically for Deputy Administrator Coleman. Government tech adoption can sometimes move very slowly. What parts of government are most primed to think about adopting either AI or AI safeguards?
Oh, wow. I'm not even sure I can answer that, but I look across, my government peer agencies. All of them are responding to the executive order, having a chief AI officer in place. and really looking at how to use AI. Some of them are more internally focused. Some, like the State Department and USAID, are more externally focused, but both. I mean, as I said, it can be used to make our own work more efficient, but then really to look at how to deploy it around the world. So, the Health and Human Services, Department of Homeland Security, we're all of us are using AI and working really, really rapidly to figure out how to both manage risk that we've been talking about a lot, but also to deploy generative AI for good, for efficiency, for effectiveness, and for true innovation. I think that as I said, we've only begun to scratch the surface on that.
Great, thank you for that. Sorry for the sneeze, it's springtime in DC. I think one for you, Jeff, probably. How do you distinguish between modest Photoshop edits and more substantial content edits? Will this be an all or nothing metric for authenticity?
It's a great question. So we actually don't need to be the ones to distinguish, which is good news.
Yeah.
The way that the specification works is that content is signed as early as possible in its life cycle, so ideally at the point of creation. And then every single edit afterwards can be appended to it, almost like a track changes document that you would write in Microsoft Word. You would see all of those edits over time, and you would see exactly what was done, if the hue was changed, or the saturation, or a crop was made. Those are benign edits, right? And people should be able to do that. It should be able to be transparent in the media file. And if major edits are made, maybe AI is used to enhance the image, or add something, or remove something, that's also tracked the same way. So consumers ultimately have that information available to themselves. And at the smartphone layer, even the ability to sign an image as soon as it comes out of the CMOS sensor and track the computational changes to that image in the pipeline on the camera is possible. So it's not up to Truepic necessarily, it's more about the implementation and making sure that those changes are modified and included in the manifest.
Got it.
Yeah, I think you have the metadata of the image, and we'll show actually a demo tomorrow at the East stage, where we'll exactly show how you can basically track each of those changes that are being made to the image. And as those changes are made, there's a record of those changes, so you know exactly how the image has basically gone through in its life cycle. And it could be that at one point in time, like you said, these are benign changes, you're changing the brightness, but at some point in time you could be saying, well, change the background, and you're no longer in DC, it shows you're somewhere in Miami. Right, so all those changes will be listed, and of course that's kept with the image, and that's how people are exactly aware of what they're looking at.
Interesting. What about this one is intriguing. Much of the more sinister AI generated content seems to come from open source models. Does content provenance work for those? I don't know if you gentlemen have.
The answer is it can work for open source models or closed source models. The question is the creator, the platform, the individual creator implementing C2PA? That is more, are they a good actor that's looking to include transparency data? The C2PA specification certainly affords that capability. And again, nefarious bad actors are unlikely to include that transparency information.
Okay. So, Deputy Administrator, someone would like to know if there are parts of the world that strike you either as particularly resilient or have particular vulnerabilities to synthetic media risks.
I'm not sure that any parts of the world have particular resiliency. I think the risks are there for all countries in different ways. In terms of being really exposed, I think that when I look around the world at what's going on, I think the most malign actor today in this misinformation space is the Russian Federation. So countries that are really on the front line of Putin's various types of war that he is waging, I think are really most vulnerable. So it can be in Africa, it can be in Asia, it can really be, and certainly in Europe. I think there are tremendous vulnerabilities.
And you don't
but all over the world.
You don't think they are potentially overextended at the moment because of their war in Ukraine? Do you think they still have the same capabilities as they did
They
before?
have tremendous capabilities in the information space because it's relatively cheap, to be perfectly honest. They have originated and perfected, the bot factories and the troll factories, and they can set up troll and bot factories in Africa and various countries. We know that they're doing it. We know that they are really impacting the information space in a lot of different ways, and countries are very vulnerable to not even begin to have the resources to marshal against it. So I think that, again, it's very low cost. And we have seen, I use this phrase, cheap fakes, deep fakes and cheap fakes. The impact of a deep fake can be huge, but it can be a pretty time-intensive process to create a deep fake. And now we're seeing cheap fakes have huge impact.
How do you
So,
distinguish them?
I don't know, I'll leave it up to these guys to distinguish it, but I think it's pretty simple, crude almost manipulation of an image that people are not quite so prepared to discern what's real and what's not. And so, it can have the same effect of eroding trust, creating just confusion or dissension, or it really has the same effect that they're trying to achieve with a much more elaborate and expensive deepfake.
Okay. Interesting. Ziad, talk about the, benefiting from the genuine value of the technologies. I mean, where does Qualcomm stand as far as what technology users need to know to get that genuine value out of their digital content in the age of AI?
I think what we are able to do is to start to bring a lot of these capabilities that are still residing in the cloud onto the device. So that really changes the dynamics, right? So I gave this example in the morning also when you had the internet just sitting on the PC, it was available to a certain number of people. And once you brought the internet to the smartphone, it's available to 6 billion plus people at this point in time, right? So generative AI, and to be able to democratize the benefits, it does require for it to be able to run on the device. But it also has amazing inherent benefits. And the benefit comes from the fact that the data is actually created on the device. It's created at the edge of the network. If you're taking a picture, if you're basically collecting some other data, it's all created on the smartphone, on the IoT device, on the PC, or what have you. And to be able to process it over there means that you can keep the data there. That's the privacy argument there. So just imagine that you have a document. So one of the great use cases of productivity is that you can summarize the document very easily using generative AI. If you do that with the service that's sitting in the cloud, well, the document needs to be uploaded to the cloud. The processing happens there, but now that document sits there forever. Whereas if you are able to actually do that summarization, that AI experience, if it can run on your PC locally, well, the document never left your device. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to do with the benefits that accrue with on-device processing. So what we're doing today is we have NPUs and CPUs and GPUs that can all do AI inferencing. We can run, like I said, 7, 10, 13 billion parameter models purely on the device. So now that document doesn't need to go up to the cloud to get processed. You process it and you get the summary on the device. So similarly, there are other examples. For example, let's take an example of many countries that have aging populations today. Mm-hmm. You could have a box of some sort that sits in the home. Now it's getting medical data from sensors that may be available from a patient. You, again, want that data to be, privacy and to be private. And essentially, this is another way that if you can process and be able to actually anticipate if there is a certain condition that's about to happen, on the device again, it gives you a huge benefit. We're looking at benefits like where some of us grew, watching Knight Rider. Well, we have the Knight Rider moment here, right? You can have that conversation with your car. Don't do the eject or whatever function. But in general, what you can do now is you can say, well, I have, I'm driving to the airport, but I want to be able to find some, a nice place to, get some pizza or something like that. The device is able to interact with you. It knows the surrounding. It knows what you like, what you prefer. Every day I'm coming into work, I'm like, hey, I need to do these 3 things. I need to meet those 2 people. It would be great if I can talk to my car and say, hey, schedule these 3 meetings for me. You actually have a true assistant that could be sitting in your car. Of course, it can also do all the driver assist systems and can figure out the best path to go from one point to another for you. So we think the utility that people are going to be able to derive from doing AI is just massive. Another great thing on being able to do it on the device, which you cannot do, for example, in the cloud, is personalization. So today what happens, I always give this example, let's say you're traveling, your device knows you're traveling. So I can just ask, well, I have half a day today, what should I do? And it knows my age, it knows my preference, it can say, maybe you can go to that museum or what have you. But you can have my 11-year-old daughter, and she asks that question and gives the same answer if you do the service in the cloud. Whereas in the device, with the benefit of the information that's already available on the device, you can actually get a far better answer. So there are many advantages that people can get from it. We really think that AI is going to be very hybrid in nature, which means whatever you can probably process on the device, you process over there, and it does not cost that much, it doesn't burn that much in terms of energy. And then whenever you need those larger models, you need more capability, you always have the cloud that's available to you. So we think that's the true story that will really democratize these experiences, of course doing it safely and putting in all the guardrails.
But everything that you just described sounds like it needs a certain level of technological sophistication in order to do it. And I think of, my 80-something-year-old parents at home who would not know how to navigate what you just described, and I'll talk to them about the cloud and they'll look at me like I'm crazy. But they're also vulnerable to disinformation online and the potential risks that we've talked about. And so,
but they don't need to know, I feel, right? They don't need to know if the processing is happening on the cloud or it's happening on the device. I think the orchestration that the AI software would be able to do would take care of that. And they would be able to accrue the benefits. Of course, like I said, you still need to have all the different levels of governance and regulation and all to be able to make sure it's safe, it's fair, it's all the benefits that we need to get from AI will be there. But they don't need to know the details, just like today.
So it's just built into software updates.
Built into software. Yeah. And then of course we'll build in things like the Truepic enhancements and others. And as time comes by, to make sure that people are staying safe and they're getting this benefit.
Got it. You would say.
Well, I'd just like to jump in and talk about a risk we haven't discussed yet, which is the risk of AI really deepening the digital divide. And so it's not just your 80-year-old parent or grandparent who doesn't know what the cloud is, but it's the roughly third of the world that's not online. It's almost 3 billion people, and what we are seeing is AI provides real opportunities to help drive development outcomes. So, having children who are in schools, in all sorts of very resource-scarce environments, through AI, can have, very simple SMS augmented with almost like a bespoke tutor to really help them address their learning needs in a way that could never be provided, even frankly, in an American classroom, let alone in a Angolan classroom or a Kenyan classroom. And we're seeing the possibility of doing things like that, but there are so many millions and millions of kids, billions, who are not online at all. And I can just see the divides getting bigger and bigger, both between developed and developing countries, and even within developing countries, those who have access to the internet and those who don't.
It is a very fascinating point you just made. And it this question sort of builds on it. Given all the disinformation already out there that isn't AI generated, to what extent does synthetic content really represent a step change in disinformation? Or is it only making a difference on the margins until deepfakes are really convincing?
It's a great question, and I would say, so cheap fakes were mentioned, right? So disinformation is not new, we can start there. Disinformation is not a new problem. So the question here is, where are we from a societal standpoint in terms of just general trust in our systems? And where can fissures occur? And we've seen it already with cheap fakes. The challenge with deep fakes is that, again, from a consumer education standpoint, we are very underprepared, and deep fakes are not just synthetic video. Synthetic audio, as an example, poses an enormous threat. There are many scams that are being carried out where a parent receives a phone call from a child in distress, and it's not their child, it is an audio deepfake. Right, and these things are happening all over the world right now, and there were, I believe it was yesterday or 2 days ago, Warren Buffett at the Berkshire annual meeting said that synthetic media scams will be the next big growth industry. So, you know, I would say that while the problems aren't new, the scale of the problems and the sophistications of the problem are at a level we have never seen, and we are completely unprepared to deal with those. And it's, you know, we'll say outside of the audio scams, one thing that's really concerning, our team spends a lot of time thinking about these issues, it's not always the sort of big political deep fake where, you know, someone's launching a nuclear missile, that case has come up many times in the media. There's a lot of local use of synthetic media, you know, images that classmates will circulate of each other on WhatsApp, right, that are causing massive issues on a local basis, and that's starting to get some coverage now as well. But it shows that this can happen at multiple levels within our information ecosystem, and I think we've already seen that we're sort of underprepared from a literacy standpoint to cope with these things. So
goodness. I have a Qualcomm specific question. Qualcomm is thinking about how to ethically and transparently add AI to devices, but is everyone, is the question. Surely there will be AI on devices that are not ethically engineered. How do we keep those instances from spreading deceptive content?
Yeah, I think this is exactly the ecosystem challenge that we've talked about, right? We need more and more people to adopt these technologies and these enhancements. Now, the way I think about it is that if you think from a consumer perspective, they again value the authenticity of what they're looking at and the content that they're consuming. And I think in that context, people will value those solutions and those providers who can actually provide them this degree of authenticity with C2PA and the enhancements like what we are doing in the solutions. So I think it will be the consumer-driven interest in this also that will drive the need for people to really adopt this technology more and more. So it will take time. I do agree with that, but I think the industry is incentivized, I feel, in my opinion, to actually do more of it, to make AI safer.
Okay, great. There's we have time for maybe one or two more questions. This one is posed as a hard question. How are you preparing for potential abuses of content authentication technologies?
Thankfully, again, Truepic is not the only one that has to prepare and solve for these things. C2PA is an open specification. There are many, many companies involved in it, many large technology companies, many small companies, think tanks, all working to build the most robust solution possible. And there are specific groups within the C2PA, for example, the Threats and Harms Working Group, that focuses specifically on how a bad actor may try to attack the specification, may try to create something that would cause distrust in the standard or whatnot. And what I would say is that group has done a tremendous amount of work to build something extremely robust. Truepic specifically works on securely implementing the standard, so going one step further and ensuring that the way folks implement the open source or Truepic's own solutions are done at such a level and they're very robust against bad actors. And again, one example of that is doing hardware level integration. So the ability to operate within the trusted execution environment of a device where you would need a sophisticated bad actor tapping into copper, on a phone to be able to inject bad data. That level of security is something that we focus on and that the standard has invested, quite a bit of time and energy into.
Great. And just one more to wrap things up, Deputy Administrator, I'll go to you. Do we consider non-permissive areas, conflict zones ranging from Ukraine to Gaza, parts of Syria, or other closed-off locations potentially more at risk? I mean, you talked about sort of the gap between developed and the developing world and the underdeveloped world. What about in war zones? Are they more vulnerable?
Yeah, I think war zones, information is another form of warfare, and you see it in war zones, but I also think that AI has enormous potential in war zones to be able to document atrocities, to be able to authenticate images, the work we're doing with Truepic, as you mentioned, in Ukraine, looking at destruction of cultural heritage. I mean, these types of things, I think AI can be a real force for good in a war zone, in the hands of people who are, facing military onslaught, also information warfare, but then can use this to really help promote better outcomes after the war too.
I've worked with Ukrainian prosecutors, and I know for a fact they rely so heavily on some of this technology also to piece together some of the war crime related investigations. So I think not the most uplifting note to end things on.
But I will say that, around the world, we are just beginning to scratch the surface on the good stuff that we can do. I mean, at USAID, we are deploying AI in the health sphere. We have people now with portable x-rays and computer-aided detection. They can actually take a chest x-ray and then scan it using generative AI to understand whether TB might be there, providing low-cost detection in places where there are no doctors. And it really, the AI to right now be deployed in rainforests where they can, the generative AI again is listening and collecting all of these sounds to be able to spot where illegal deforestation may be happening, logging or poaching or these types of things. Again, we're just scratching the surface, but it's really about training people, teaching people, providing them with the skills and resiliency for their own ability as these new technologies come online, that they know to look for the little sign that we will all see in a couple of years of widespread, and to question what they're doing, and also to really think through what they are looking for. What does rights respecting mean in their own society? And making sure that the models that are being developed, the algorithms, that they are inclusive of people. We've seen in some of the places that we're working, these models, people are excluded. Mm-hmm. So the models are doubling down on the exclusion, and us helping to say, look, this whole class of people, or gender even, is excluded from these models, and helping to adjust to make the outcomes better. I think there's just enormous potential and opportunity too.
That's much more optimistic. Thank you for throwing that in. And I want to remind you all, by the way, that Jeff and Ziad are presenting tomorrow. The teasers they put out sound like it's going to be a really fascinating presentation, so don't miss that. Thank you so much, Deputy Administrator Jeff, Ziad. Thank you all very much.